Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker shows, death slaves, hurts, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And let's go back to the not so good old USA in this case because something stinks at Fannie and Freddie. And a bunch of stories have come out recently that show that something's going on over there. Something's not quite right. And we all shouldn't be surprised because we have Mel Watt in charge of the FHA now. Obama put him in that position recently. And let's not forget, he is a bank bootlicker extraordinaire, Mr. Mel Watt. He used to be in the same district as the Bank of America headquarters. So we know he had close connections with that bank, and all his policies always showed that when he was working in the Senate. So now we have a situation where there's a controversy brewing because the fact that the Obama administration is keeping 11,000 government documents hidden having to do with Fannie and Freddie. So when there's somebody fighting that hard to protect these documents, one has to wonder what's going on, particularly in light of some of the other stories that have gone on. And one of the stories that's gone on is that the hedge fund is suing Fannie and Freddie, Perry Capital, and they're filing an appeal, and they allege that the government was taking profits that belong to shareholders. And this is due to fact that $218 billion was supposedly paid back to the Treasury from Fannie and Freddie for the taxpayer bailout. But the bailout terms were adjusted in 2012, requiring that all profits go to the U.S. government and do not count as a repayment for the bailout. And so anyway, that change was opposed by the shareholders because they felt like they were entitled to some of the improved health of Fannie and Freddie. And all the money from the bank settlements, all the money in the fines against all the banks for mortgage fraud have all been soaked into Fannie and Freddie. And so they've ended up giving the government quite a nice chunk of change. And I'll get to that soon. And but what we have that's also interesting is this government narrative that the Fannie and Freddie are still a basket case. And in fact, there was talk that they might need another bailout. Fannie Mae officials suggest that they may need another bailout. They talked about a capital cushion before 2008 of $30 billion, and now it's down to $1.2 billion today. So that means that the government's been siphoning off all the profits. And they suggest they'll run out of money by 2018. They will need to draw from the Treasury, which will be another bailout. And so they've already gotten $258 billion bailout if you total everything up. And theoretically, a lot of that is still owed if the government is taking the profits out of Fannie and Freddie and channeling them somewhere else. And that's one of the things that seems to be indicated in these articles. And then we have Mel Watt calling for housing finance reform, and these calls for another bailout and talking about how Fannie and Freddie are a basket case is all pushing for finance reform. And that's where it gets interesting, because what the talk is that the finance reform is future plans to have a private consortium of banks take over the Fannie and Freddie market. And I would suggest that everything points in that direction, and I think that's a good speculation. And that would also explain why Obama is going to such great efforts to hide 11,000 government documents associated with Fannie and Freddie, why Mel Watt is pushing for reform, and the idea that they're going to essentially give the banks another handout, another freebie, another bailout in essence, by turning over the Fannie Freddie market back to the banks who used all that material to partially destroy the U.S. economy. And also one of the bonanzas for the banks in this, of course, is the exposure in derivatives. Counterparty exposure the Wall Street banks have to Fannie and Freddie derivatives, interest rate derivatives, was $72 billion in 1993, but by 2001 was $1.6 trillion, and that's a lot of derivative exposure. And we can assume it's probably 10 trillion or more at this point. And it's all the same counterparties being protected, and that's also part of this conspiracy that's going on at Fannie and Freddie, is that the exposure to derivatives, and it's protecting J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and all the rest of the cronies. And U.S.'s total exposure is pretty astounding at this point. And if the banks took it over, it would just be a bonanza for them. So anyway, there is a possible conspiracy going on here with Fannie and Freddie, and just kind of keep our eyes peeled to see if there's a new push for Fannie and Freddie reform that involves basically turning them over to the too big to fail banks. And then there'll be even too bigger to fail banks. I'm East Lydia. Don't you be one too.